And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Hello, everybody. I'm Larry Sabato, Director of the Center for Politics, and we are back again with a special event, a very special event, sponsored by the UVA Center for Politics. And we are pleased to welcome back again and again and again and again, Jonathan Karl. And you all know him and have seen him many, many times. He's ABC News's chief Washington correspondent. He's co-anchor of This Week on Sunday morning, which I always enjoy watching because he informs us. And I told him I'm out of breath because I had to watch on my regular TV, ABC World News Tonight, because at least one out of every 2 evenings, he has a big scoop. Now, tonight, it turned out because he was running to be on this critical program for his book, that he didn't have one. But we're gonna talk to him about the forthcoming scoops that are coming up about mainly the January 6th committee, but lots of other things as well. John is also the former president of the White House Correspondents Association. Do you at least get to sit with Trevor Noah since he's going to be the guest this year?
You know, this is my show because, you know, I had this huge show planned. I got it all set up and then COVID happened. So this is the first show, you know, since the one that was supposed to be mine. So I hope I get something, for God's sake. You know,
they absolutely. I tell you what, you can sit at my table. You're going to provide me with those tickets, of course, but you're going to sit at my table right in front of Trevor Noah, which is just as good. So I look forward to that. Let me know what the dates are so I can mark out my calendar. In any event, I'm kidding you, but it's a great organization. Now, look, you have been author already, and we've had you on this show. And we made you a New York Times bestseller with Front Row at the Trump Show. And I believe you told me that was March of 2020. And that's, hey, no matter which part of the screen they're looking at, they're going to see Front Row of the Trump Show. But seriously, for those who are watching, if you haven't read this, you have to read it, because as much as we thought we knew about Trump, we learned a heck of a lot more from this book. And some of it was just plain funny. Most of it, of course, deeply disturbing, as those of us who lived through the Trump administration are well familiar. But now there is another book that's actually more serious and more disturbing. And if you haven't read it, you must read it. It is Betrayal. And I believe Jason has this exactly. That looks better with you. Betrayal, the final act of the Trump Show, by Jonathan Karl, and Betrayal is absolutely the appropriate title. I disagree with you that it's the final act of the Trump Show. I don't think he will ever go away until he is called to another plane, as we sometimes say in certain religions. I just don't see an end to it, but we're going to talk about that, and I want to see what you think. Jonathan, you've had so many scoops on what Trump did in his administration, wholly apart from January 6th, but also the coup, which was a long playing operation, which we didn't know at the time. And you told us a lot about it. I keep seeing stories about events that I've already read in your books. They need to go back and cite the source here. One of my favorites, and correct me if I've got this quote wrong, I'm trying to remember it precisely, but you had Trump calling Pence as he drove to the Capitol on January 6, 2021, to do his constitutional duty despite Trump. And what did Trump say to Pence?
You know, I don't know if you have the same rules we have on broadcast television in terms
of
you
can cuss all you want. No, these are adults. Students are over 18. No problem.
Yeah. I mean, there had been a report that morning he had told Pence, you know, he was still pressuring him, still saying, "You got to do this for me, Mike. It's all with you." And he said, "You have a choice. You can be a patriot or you can be a pussy." And when I interviewed Trump 2 months after, almost exactly 2 months to the day after he left the White House, I expected he would deny that, say, "Oh, there's no way." And as a matter of fact, his press office at the time did deny it. And he said, "Oh, no, I said it." Because he did. He was almost proud of talking to his vice president that morning, the morning of January 6th, that way. I mean, really astounding.
John, I guess you could say from another perspective, because we try to be balanced here at the UVA Center for Politics, it may be one of the few redeeming qualities that Trump has. Sometimes he will come right out and admit the outrageous things that he has said in private. But the fact that he said it, I agree with you, was beyond the bend, and it must have told Pence what was coming. And that's the first subject that I want to cover with you, because it's ancient, but it's current. Mike Pence, I believe his wife told him not to accept the vice presidency. She wasn't happy about it because she had a pretty good idea of what Donald Trump was like. He accepted it. He was the good boy throughout the 4 years, the silent part of the team, did everything that he was told, backed Trump up to the maximum extent. And then came the election, and what happened with the election, the attempted coup, January the 6th, and it all fell apart. How do you analyze what we've seen recently, that Pence saying Trump was wrong and essentially breaking with him for all practical purposes?
The context is really important here that you've alluded to, and that is he was the ultimate loyalist. And I remember I actually saw Pence the morning that the morning after the Access Hollywood tape broke during the campaign, which was the absolute lowest point for Donald Trump during that campaign. And it was a time in 2016 when the Republicans all basically wrote him off, and everybody assumed the election was over, and everybody came out and and criticized what was essentially indefensible, his words on that tape. And Pence didn't. And Pence, the evangelical, the straight-laced guy, the guy that, was probably, never uttered a profanity in his life, to hear what Trump said on that tape, and then not to come out and to say anything critical was really something I saw. That morning he was coming in, he actually had an interview on Good Morning America, and he looked at me and I said, man, is it over? What's happening? And he just gave me this kind of like weird expression that seemed, I thought at the moment, said, oh my God, this loon, we're done. But he never said anything publicly. Into the Trump presidency, all those dark moments, all those, that Charlottesville, when, even somebody like Gary Cohn, threatened to resign over it. And, and others, came out and publicly distanced themselves from Trump. He didn't say anything about it. So he never criticized, never once was there, forget a criticism, never once was there a sense publicly that Pence even had a slight disagreement with Donald Trump about anything. And then comes January 6th, and this, massive effort to, he basically, Trump has figured out, he's tried the lawsuits, they've all failed. He's gone to the state legislatures in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, tried to get them to overturn their own elections by sending their own separate set of electors. That fails. He's tried to get the Justice Department involved. He's tried to get Bill Barr to work with him on this. He's tried to get Republicans in Congress, enough of them, which was never going to work, but he tried to be able to vote to throw out, challenge, Biden's. Everything fails, and he knows it's all. The only thing left is to somehow think that Mike Pence, as he's presiding over that counting of the electoral votes on January 6th, to say, nope, no Michigan votes, no Georgia votes, no Pennsylvania votes, and then voila, Trump has a path finally to victory. And Pence, to his credit, he never seriously considered it at all. He knew from the start it was a done deal. There's Woodward has a story that Dan Quayle called him up and said, no, you don't have power. He didn't need a call from Dan Quayle, by the way. Pence knew this was just not something he was going to do. But it was the one betrayal of
John. Did he call Quayle, or did Quayle call him?
My understanding is Quayle called him.
Quayle called him. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a little ambiguous in Woodward's account, but my understanding is.
I wondered about that.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
I got to ask you this too, because I'm not
It
trying.
wasn't like he was seeking. Come on, let's call Dan Quayle. He's the guy. He'll know. He was vice president. He can tell.
He's from Indiana,
Can
just
I
like
do this?
me. He's from Indiana.
He's from Indiana. Come on, he can do it.
Do you think that Pence was briefed daily on all of the shenanigans that Trump was trying in order to turn the election around, or was Pence somewhat in the dark?
Pence was he was largely in the dark because I went, as you know, because you've read Betrayal. I mean, I went back and kind of reconstructed as much as I could, almost like a day to day. What was going on, who Trump was talking to, who was in the meetings, and for the most part, Pence was not in these meetings. And in fact, Mark Meadows, I allude to this in the book. Mark Meadows actually banned Mark Short, Pence's chief of staff, from these meetings. There was a story at the very end around January 6th where he was actually supposedly not even allowed into the White House complex, but all during the transition, Short, as the chief of staff for the vice president, would be at key White House meetings, and he's found himself turned away at the door by Mark Meadows.
Was it because Meadows and therefore Trump believed that Pence was not being loyal enough, or were they worried that Mark Short, who, full disclosure, a former student of mine,
yes,
graduate school here, and I know he's talked to you many times as well. Was he considered a leak or somebody who could not be trusted?
They didn't think that they would go along with any of this stuff. They didn't think that Pence's staff or Pence himself was going to be somebody that was going to go along with it. And if you go back and you look, Pence never repeated the wild allegations about hundreds of thousands of dead people voting, or ballots under desks, or all the stuff, the rigged voting machines. Pence never once anywhere said any of it. He was largely silent during this period. He did raise, and I have a quote from Pence, which I think was lost to history. I had no recollection of it. I even knew, but it was on that March. On January 4th, when Pence went down for one last campaign stop for the Georgia senators, and then Trump went down that night, and that's when he publicly criticized, said, I hope Pence comes through with us. If he's not, I'm not going to be happy. But in the speech that Pence had earlier in the day in Georgia, he made an allusion to, I quoted in the book, of that we're going to get to the bottom of all the irregularities, and the applause from the crowd clearly freaks Pence out, and because Pence was actually then raising expectations for himself with those people. So
plus he knew there was nothing to this. He knew, Pence, if anybody, knew there was nothing to this whatsoever.
No.
When, of course, he and Trump had talked from time to time, at least during that transition period. Do you know that if at any point Pence had encouraged Trump to believe that he agreed in part, certainly not in full, but in part, with what Trump was saying about the election? Did he give Trump any reason to believe that he might go along with what Trump wanted on January 6th?
Never. The closest he did, and he did this in several conversations, is he would tell Trump essentially in these, because the talk of him playing this role started in December before people knew about it publicly. I had gotten wind of some of this stuff, and I was in touch with people that were directly familiar with these conversations. And Pence would say, I don't see it that way, sir. I don't, I don't see that I have the power to do that. I'll look into it, and if you come up with something, I'm happy to continue this. He never until 2 days before January 6th, January 4th, they do have this meeting, which I describe in detail, right before Trump flies to Georgia and issues that public threat, where Pence is like really firm. This guy John Eastman is in the meeting. Trump is in there. He's got this other North Carolina attorney on the phone, and they are laying into Pence heavily and saying, this is the Constitution. And Pence at one point says, I'm a lawyer too, and I can tell you the examples you've given are wrong. And he walked through the examples. They had crazy examples. These ones. Jefferson did it. When he was presiding as vice president and rigged the election for himself. Not true at all.
Hawaii.
Richard Nixon single-handedly took Hawaii, and but wait, he put it in Kennedy's column. Oh, okay. Was there any?
Yeah.
And as there actually were two slates of electors that came in from Hawaii.
Sure.
Nixon was simply being magnanimous. There was no objection in the chamber.
Nixon had lost.
It's entirely everything about
it. Electoral votes, was over with.
So Pence walked through all these things and said, look, there just isn't the authority. But in a lot of these previous conversations, he wouldn't tell Trump, look, you're out of your mind to think that one person can pick the president. There's nothing more un-American than that, which is what he's saying now. He didn't quite put it that harshly, but he would say, look, I've looked into this. I'm advised. I simply have no authority whatsoever to do that. But again, if you come up with something else and we'll keep looking at it. There was nothing more to keep looking at. The idea is crazy. Okay. Let's just think for a second. The vice president can decide who the next president is because he's presiding over this ceremonial session where they open votes and tabulate them. Yeah.
Well, elections are expensive. It'll save the country a lot of money to let the incumbent vice president pick the next
one person, one vote.
One person, one president. Look, this interests me. And we're going to get back to the heart of all this, which is the attempted coup d'etat. And that's exactly what it was. And to your credit, you have said that from the very beginning. Just as an observer and analyst, I've insisted on it. It's not just an insurrection; it's an attempted coup d'état, and I'm still shocked and disappointed in so many people, senior people in the media, who still hesitate to say it. I'm not talking about Fox, and they're never going to do it. I'm talking about on the major networks. But getting back to Pence, does he understand, do you think, that there will never be a reconciliation with Trump, and that if somehow Pence has a future, and I'm not sure he does, it's going to be because Trump fails and falls?
Yes, I think it's a belated understanding, but I think that he has come to that realization. And I think that my read of it is I think that Pence actually runs for president even if Trump runs. I think it's that much that he realizes that there is a reckoning coming. But Pence also believes, and maybe he's correct here. I don't think he is, but my sense is that Pence believes that his only path to being elected president is to have the support of all those people that supported Donald Trump and to basically run as a continuation of the Trump-Pence administration. So it's a break with Trump, but it's not really a break with Trump. And that's why he is, I think, so timid in how he's handled this. He came out and he gave this speech. He said there's nothing more American than the idea that one person could choose the next president. So in other words, there is nothing more un-American than what Donald Trump has been saying for the last, year plus. And utter those words, I disagree with President Trump, which we know he disagreed because he didn't do it on January 6th last year. We know he wrote this long, tedious statement that he released, just as the opening session was starting, that explained why he disagreed with Donald Trump about all of that. And he gave a speech at the Reagan Library last summer where he said, he didn't use those words, I disagree with President Trump. He said, I disagree with those who say blah, blah, blah. But now I think he finally realized that there has to be a reckoning. Now, this will never happen. We can engage in a little bit of a kind of a fantasy here. But if Mike Pence were to come out and really forcefully, not just say the words, I disagree with President Trump. That shocked us only because it was Pence saying it and the guys never disagreed with him. But if he were to take a larger stage, let's call it primetime hearing of the January 6th committee, and really outline not just how un-American and unconstitutional the demand that Trump made was, but about how dangerous it was and what it did to the country, and talk in some gripping detail, which he could, about his own experience running for his life essentially in the Capitol building. And say that it's time for us, for whatever we agree with Donald Trump on all these issues, and I helped implement all those issues for him. He needs to be excised from the Republican Party if the Republican Party is to have a future as a majoritarian party. To do something really dramatic like that would be a really fascinating thing, But again, it's a fantasy because, I think that we've seen from Pence effectively as strong as he's going to criticize, his former boss. And here's the thing, like one other thing about this with Pence. I mean, look, I think it was truly an act of personal bravery and principle what he did on January 6th. I also think that if he didn't do it, he would have been breaking the law and he would have been committing effectively an act of treason against his own country. So I don't, on substance, I give him credit for not being not torching the Constitution. Okay. But given all the pressure he was under from the crowd, from Trump, from all the people around Trump, I give him credit for a real act of bravery on that day. But the question is, where does he go with it now? And is he willing to go the next step to say that, because Trump tried to do something that was so harmful to our country, he needs to not, I don't just disagree with him, but I think that the Republican Party needs to renounce him. That's the thing that he'd have to do.
Yeah. And really, what would it get him? I don't think it would get him the nomination. I suppose he could reduce the chances that Trump would get the nomination in 2024, but I don't know how it would really help Pence. But, he needs to stress something that he hasn't. There really were people there, and it's become obvious now on January 6th. There were people there who did want to kill him. That wasn't just a chant about hang Mike Pence. There were people who, if they had found him, I think would have, at the very minimum, roughed him up if they'd gotten through the Secret Service and perhaps carried it further. So, the fact that he has any loyalty to Trump at all is remarkable and not very admirable in lots of different ways.
When a mob is chanting for your execution, if that mob gets to you, even if those guys chanting it were like, the mob takes over.
Yes.
His life was absolutely in danger.
Do you think this is leading to real powerful testimony by Trump in the public hearings? I mean, he's had his people go, and they've been apparently relatively frank. I think you broke some of this. Yeah. They've been pretty frank before the committee. Of course, they weren't in public. But it almost seems like the way is being prepared for Trump to do something in public at this committee once they hold public hearings.
My understanding is that even Bernie Kerik, who is, basically Giuliani's henchman, the former commissioner of police and former felon who did jail time, and Giuliani's right-hand man, who was present for all this crazy stuff at the end, he testified and, I was told provided some pretty helpful and relevant information about, again, this coup attempt. Because as you've pointed out, it's not just the people that went into the building. That was actually not the most dangerous thing that happened. That was maybe the most physically dangerous but in terms of to the Republic, it was all the buildup and all the effort to try to do everything to basically seize power. It's a coup. It's to try to take power from the duly elected president. So people now, as far as Trump, there's a bit of a debate in the committee that hasn't really played out in public. But it's a discussion that's going on, and that is, do you seek Donald Trump's testimony? They haven't done it yet. They haven't invited him yet. They haven't tried to subpoena him yet. And do you want him? The related question: do you want him to testify? If Donald Trump takes that stage, the testimony, trust me, because I've spent a lot of time interviewing him, he's not suddenly going to become a useful witness and and answer the questions truthfully and say, and have some moment where it's like, oh my God, they got him. He's going to use that stage to repeat all his lies, and he's going to turn it into a spectacle. And he's going to use it if he would agree to do it. I doubt he would, but he might be tempted for this very reason, because it would be his chance to try to completely, basically go on offense, do what he did when he took the stage with Joe Biden in that first debate. So they have to make a decision. Do they invite him? Do they try to press it, subpoena him? Should be a tough one to enforce. And more to the point, even if they could prevail, do they want him? And I know at least some very influential people on that committee think that there's nothing to gain by having Donald Trump testify.
You're certainly not going to gain the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yeah. Well, here it is. I really didn't want to lose. I'm sorry.
Well, I want to turn in just a second to the actual coup and how it developed and where this committee is headed with it. But first, I've learned in all these book products, halfway through, it is very important to hold up the book again, the trail. And everybody who's watching, you want to go not just to the online booksellers, names we could mention, where to go, but don't forget about your independent booksellers. They are a very important part of the book business in the United States. So wherever you get it. But don't forget about the independent booksellers. They're everywhere, and they need our support. They've had a tough time during the pandemic, so let's help them out too.
And Larry, yes. Before you go on, I want to thank you for holding the book up again seriously, because this is not just about trying to sell a book. The book is the most important thing I've ever done. It's the most important thing in my career, most professionally, and I want people to read this. I want people to know it. I want people who support Donald Trump to read this book. So if you have a Trump supporter friend, I didn't write this in a way that I hope didn't come across as some kind of a anti-Republican polemic. I tried to really keep it to what happened and the facts in a very compelling way, I hope, and to speak to people, which I tried explicitly to do, to speak to people that believe what Donald Trump has said about the election being stolen, and just to try to go through and show what happened in a way that is not, like I'm ranting on a primetime cable television show or something, but is the historic record. So anyway, so I thank you. It's the book means more to me than, television pays the bills, but the book to me is important, and not just for me, but I think it's important for people to know what happened.
Well, it should be, and really both of them together. You can read both of them together and learn an awful lot. You're kind of in the Joe Friday dragnet, just the facts ma'am kind of mode in here. And you're right, it's not hyper at all. The best thing I can say about it is this book would not fit on Twitter. It doesn't have that kind of hyper language.
I should say some people have criticized me and others who have written books and said, well, why did you hold this back for a book? Why didn't you put this out? And to me, it's a fundamental misreading of what this project is. I mean, you don't do this in, 240 characters at a time? That's not the way it works. And I wanted to, and I spent most of last year, I kind of disappeared for long periods of time. People ask me, what's wrong? What happened to you? Why don't I see you on TV? I went and I did the deep dive, investigative work, the research, talking to people who I knew might kind of disappear on me, ghost me after a while. I pursued the story. It's the kind of project you can do if you are writing a book. You're not going to do it in a spot on the evening news. You're not going to do it in an article in the New York Times. This is, you need something big. You need to be able to go through and to do the dive, and then to take the time to explain it all and the context and how you got to where you got. This is not little nuggets dripped out on Twitter.
No, it absolutely is. And again, I'll just go ahead and hold it up.
There you go. Good, good.
But you know what? Real books about politics, books that matter, are the kind where you can't put it down. You do read it through. Maybe it takes a few days, but you read it all the way through, and then you put it down and you say, "My God." And that's what this book does. And so did Front Row at the Trump Show. It just caused me, I follow it minute by minute like you do. It's very unhealthy, but that's what we do. But it also caused me, and I think a lot of people, to say, how did we ever get here? How did America elect a president like this? My God. You know, it really makes you question the fundamentals of our system and whether the republic can work. Again, it's not working now. There are parts of it that just don't work at all. I mean, that was my reaction. That wasn't your purpose in writing the book. Yeah. And you don't take a mallet to Trump in here. You let Trump speak for himself, and maybe the effect is the same, but you're not putting words in his mouth. But people need to read this so they can take it all in. When he used to be on Twitter, you could analyze him tweet by tweet, but you never got the real him. That wasn't the real him, and it wasn't the whole him and the whole problem that we had in the country. All right, look, I want to get to the coup, because and what's coming with the coup. I mean, we're still in the middle of this, and potentially it can carry through certainly for 2022 and the sorts of people elected, the Secretary of State positions and the like. But 2024. Trump really did believe he was going to win. That much I think is true. He couldn't allow himself to believe he wasn't going to win. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's a two-part answer to that. As the pandemic hit, the country shut down, the economy tanked, Trump was presented with some really grim polling. It was one of the few times that his political operatives actually were honest with him, and they said, look, you were headed to a big win. You got through, you got acquitted in the impeachment trial, first impeachment trial. The economy was rolling. You were headed, we were looking at 380 electoral votes. They told him. But now, we have a big problem, a big problem, and it's going to be very hard to win. And it's about that time that Trump started to say, there's no way we can lose. The only way we can lose is if they steal it from us. Now, the reason why he was saying that is because he saw that a loss was that he was maybe even likely to lose. I mean, I think he did believe it. I think he was scared about it. I think that's why he ramped up all that talk about election fraud. You can almost see it exactly from when these briefings that he got in the late spring to when he started using that rhetoric about how there was no way he could lose. But then what happened is he starts campaigning in earnest in the fall. And I'm telling you, Larry, it was a sight to see that Trump would do. It was really some of the most impressive political kind of retail campaigning that you'd ever seen. I mean, he was doing 3 events a day, sometimes in 3 different states. And then he started doing up to 5 a day, 5 major, not stop by and do a little diner stop, like huge rallies. And every single one of them was outside because of the pandemic. Many of them were in places that were extremely cold, because they're in Michigan and Wisconsin, and people had to wait for 6-7 hours to get in. Sometimes they waited overnight to get in, and they did, and they turned out. And at one point they started chanting towards those last couple of days, "We love you." I mean, this huge crowds come out, and meanwhile he's looking over at Biden. And Biden's barely eking out an event a day, and they're frankly lame. I mean, because he's abiding by all the COVID restrictions. They're doing these car rallies where people drive into a drive-in movie theater lot and honk their horns when they like something. I mean, I covered some of these things. They didn't look like big energy. This was not impressive. So he saw all that stuff and he thought he was absolutely going to win. He said there was no way that Biden was going to win. I mean, look how lame he is. He's in his basement in Delaware. I'm out and the people adore me. And they're the big, and look, the Trump movement is one of the biggest mass political movements, in American history. I mean, it's really the fervent support that he had. It was really a marvel. And he sucked that in and looked out at that and he's like, there's no way he's going to lose.
And you know what? I think that's what saved us.
Yeah.
Because if he had continued thinking, as you're suggesting, and you're right, I had forgotten about those early briefings, maybe March or April or whatever.
April, May, into that.
Yeah, April, May of 2020.
Yeah.
If he had thought he was going to lose and that he really had to do something extreme to keep the presidency, he may have started this coup plot much earlier and in a much more detailed fashion, because it didn't really get going until after the election, right?
Yeah, so it started a little bit in those, again, around the time of the briefings when he, started undermining the idea of mail-in voting. And why was he doing that? It actually drove his campaign people kind of crazy because they were trying to get people to vote by mail, but he was doing that because he was thinking, he was laying the predicate for saying there was widespread fraud. But yes, you're right. I think that if he had seen defeat coming in that final stretch, who knows what he would have done.
Well, he probably would have started his planning for the coup a little bit earlier. And people around him would too, because some of them have told me, the ones I've talked to since, have told me that they themselves thought he was going to win. They had thought that he was in trouble. But as these crowds appeared and everything else, and they were unimpressed with Biden, they really thought they had it. And so they weren't thinking about what comes next.
I describe this on the plane to his last event, which, if I recall correctly, was in Grand Rapids, his last campaign event of 2020. They're on the plane together as people, and Eric Trump starts a little office poll, how many electoral votes are we going to get? And Eric Trump thought it was going to be 350 and he was going to do way better than he did in 2016. And others, chimed in with their guess. And then they got to this guy, Derek Lyons, who was the, I think he was the staff secretary, senior position in the Trump White House, kind of a straight-laced guy, very conservative, a lawyer. And he said 269 to 269.
Wow.
And then you'll win, and then we'll win because it'll go to the House and every delegation will 26 for. And Eric Trump looked at him like he was crazy. You're out of your mind, man. We're not going to get 269. We're getting way more than that. What are you thinking? And I have no doubt that Eric Trump absolutely believed that it was going to be. And then I also he was my research assistant on the book. Will Staken is his name. He's a great reporter. He was our embedded reporter on the Trump campaign. And so he probably visited more Trump rallies in that home stretch than anybody. He certainly anybody at ABC, but I think even among the embeds at the other networks and other news organizations, he went everywhere. And very, very, level-headed guy. And I remember on election night, as we were waiting for the returns to start coming in, I finally was with him, and he came to New York after that last event. And I said, "So Will, what do you think?" He's like, "I think he's going to win." And I was like, I almost fell over because, of course, I'm looking at the data and I'm like, there's no way he's going to win. But I'm thinking now, I'm doubting myself because Will's but it was because he was seeing it.
He was seeing it,
the reaction.
And we need to remember, even though he lost by 7 million votes, Trump did in the popular vote, he actually came within 42,000 votes of winning because of the Electoral College, even in 2020. So, your embed wasn't far off, really. And that's another subject entirely. Look, the Electoral College slates that the committee is looking into. And we know the legal questions are going to get washed out one way or the other. I know what I think about it, but I'm not a lawyer either. What do you think the committee is driving at? How will they put all these pieces together, Electoral College slates and what they're learning from the people who are testifying and the subpoenas they've sent out? What's the overall picture you see the committee seeing?
So first of all, their central challenge of the January 6th committee is to not get bogged down in details and to lose sight of the big picture. And the big picture, which I think, if you listen to Liz Cheney, I think she has a very good sense of this. I'm not sure all of them, are as clear-minded on exactly what we're talking about here. And that is an orchestrated effort by Donald Trump to overturn a presidential election and to seize power. And going through methodically how he used every means at his disposal to attempt to do this, culminating in what we saw on January 6th. But January 6th is a culmination. It's not by any means even the most important part of that story. And as I kind of describe in the book, and we've talked about a bit, I mean, it starts right after the election with what is, you had two, I described there's basically two groups of people. You have the campaign leadership and campaign lawyers, and then you have Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and that whole crowd. And there's an effort to do what you would do in any campaign that's close. You push for recounts, you file legal challenges where you think there were, there was stuff that's worthy of challenge. And they filed over, not just the campaign, it was the campaign plus the outside, lawyers, over 60 lawsuits. Some of them had at least some merit to be considered. Did Pennsylvania, violate its own rules when the state court allowed mail-in ballots to be counted even if they arrived up to 3 days after the election? By the way, even if the court ruled in their favor on that, who cares? Because not very many votes came in. It was nowhere near enough to make up the difference. But it's like it's a lawsuit. In Wisconsin, there was a lawsuit. They changed the absentee ballot rules to make it so you could basically show up, fill out a form, and get your absentee ballot, which was not the way the absentee ballot process was set up, by the state legislature in Wisconsin. So you could challenge that. Again, a weak case, but there's at least it's in the realm of, but then they started getting into, totally insane legal challenges. The Texas Attorney General's lawsuit, which was, Trump orchestrated an effort to get, over 120 or so members of Congress, Republicans in the House, to sign on to in an amicus brief, which basically called for the votes from the contested states, the 6 states they were contesting, to be thrown out.
Exactly. Which would have sent it into the House.
Just not to be counted.
Sure. Which would have sent it into the House. That's what they wanted.
I mean, it was a lawsuit to demand that the people of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, that their votes not count. Anyway, so to go through that, and then to go through the ways in which Trump tried to muscle the Department of Justice, and if they had gone along, and there's no reason to think that they wouldn't have. I mean, it was Bill Barr's Justice Department, but they stood up and said, no way. But he wanted them to use the power of the Justice Department to seize voting machines and to declare fraud where there was no fraud, and to create a crisis that would have, led to his ability to stay in power. The way he tried to use the Department of Homeland Security to do the same thing, and was told no. But to really kind of tell this story and the ways in which he was thwarted, but the ways in which if any one of those people along the line had gone along with his wishes, we could have been living in a state of martial law effectively in this country. I mean, it got really close. And who knew, that Bill Barr was going to have a moment of total defiance of Donald Trump. Nobody would have anticipated that going in. Who knew, that Chad Wolf, who was the acting, Secretary of Homeland Security, handpicked and done everything else, that he was going to say, get the hell out of here. No. Who knew that Brad Raffensperger, Trump supporter, lifelong, very conservative Republican, not much of a public figure, as a relatively obscure public, position in Georgia. Who knew that he was going to tell the president that he voted for on that phone call you're just wrong about this, sir. I mean, who knew that he was going to do that? And not say, okay, you know what? We can find 11,700
Sure,
votes.
that's just that's a few votes. I've got them under my desk.
So you go through all of the steps. The guys in Michigan. I mean, Michigan Republicans are Trump Republicans, for God's sake. I mean, Trump actually won that state. That Republicans hadn't. When was the last Republican to carry Michigan before Trump, Larry?
Let's see. Well, Reagan did.
Reagan. I mean, it's Romney had dreams of Michigan. They all have dreams of Michigan, but Trump won Michigan, and those Republicans are Trump Republicans. They're not. We don't longer talk about Reagan Democrats. Those are Trump Republicans up there. And he brought in the legislative leaders that were elected by those Trump Republicans, who were all Trump supporters themselves, and he sat them down in the Oval Office and made a demand that they convene a special session and say that we're objecting to the electoral votes as currently configured, and we're sending our own batch to Washington. And they told him to his face no. So you have to go through and, like, if any one of these people on the line had, but really outline all of the efforts to use the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, the Director of National Intelligence, and then culminating in what actually happened on January 6th and the way he brought that crowd to Washington, the way he directed that crowd to the Capitol building, the way it was coordinated around the effort where the last step in the certification was happening, the way, chapter and verse, the pressure he put on Pence. That's what they need to do. So it's not just, did his speech that morning incite people and they went and broke into the building. No, it's the multifaceted effort to try to effectively destroy American democracy. I mean, that's what it really is. I mean, you're taking the peaceful transition of power is what it's, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And look, there's a lot of ridiculousness, 4 seasons total landscaping and Rudy's melting hair, but it was a sophisticated plot.
It became that way. It worked its way through, but I hope they go one step further. This would be in the conclusion of the committee's report, but John, they have to explain why this is going to get even more serious the next time. That is, in 2022, Trump now realizes what he needs. He needs complete flunkies who won't say no. And they're running complete flunkies for Secretary of State, for many state legislative positions, and on and on. And they have to, when it comes down to the electors that they put on the slates, when it comes down to if Trump gets back in 2024, he'll know he needs a flunky in Homeland Security or as head of CISA. He'll know he needs a flunky as Attorney General and the various assistant attorneys general that might succeed for one reason or another. Trump knows how to do it now. He didn't really sit down and think it through, in part because he didn't believe it was necessary the first time. I hope the committee explains that the stakes are actually much higher for 2022 and 2024, because now they know how to steal a presidential election.
So now, the question I think that it's very key to be asking now is and be watching. I know you are. Is what happens as Trump is trying to install his people in all these Republican primaries right now, and it's what you mentioned. It's putting the flunkies in. It's secretaries of state and all of that. Those are important races to watch. He's also trying to go after and to defeat Republicans who stood up to him on January 6th, not just the ones that voted to impeach, not just Liz Cheney and people like Tom Rice of South Carolina. Some of them aren't running, but he's obviously targeting all of those who are, and the senators have voted to convict him. He's who wins these primaries. And I think Trump's going to lose. And Jonathan Martin, got a good piece in the New York Times. J-Mart looking at all this. He's going to lose some of these races. And I'm saying, and he also win. He's going to like you saw he went after Congresswoman Mace, another South Carolina, who's as Trumpy as you can be. But
she worked for him in 7 states.
Yeah, I mean, she literally worked for him in the campaign in 2016. But she said some very strong words about his responsibility for January 6th on January 6th or 7th, right in the immediate aftermath. And he got wind of that, and now he wants to defeat her in a primary. So, I think there's some potential for overreach here. And Mitch McConnell understands that the long-term survivability of Republicans, you got to defeat the guy. Otherwise, he's going to be doing this stuff. You've got to drive a stake in the heart. Kevin McCarthy obviously has a very different.
Not.
Yeah.
No, he's worried about his own position, but I agree with you. McConnell has returned to where he was a couple of days or the day after January 6th. I hope he stays there.
Yeah.
But I wonder, John, you're right, though. He's not going to win them all, but he may win enough of them to make a difference. If he's on the edge, if it's a close election, which it could easily be.
I mean, have you tracked like how does the race for Secretary of State in Georgia? How's that stacking up?
Well, it's going to be tough for Raffensperger to win a nomination. Now, if Kemp wins the gubernatorial race, then he may be able to pull Raffensperger in with him.
Yeah, I mean that would be a very symbolically incredibly important thing,
It would be, particularly if Governor Kemp wins in November as well. Now, he may or may not win or lose to Stacey Abrams, but of course this is a Republican year. But if you get some people like that in, they're not going to be inclined to do anything for Donald Trump.
Right.
What they're inclined to do is to defeat him for the nomination, which would be rather useful, I think, overall of the Republican Party. But we'll see.
And does Ducey run for Senate in Arizona? And does he win a Republican primary out there? Does he get elected to the Senate? You have somebody who Trump is now avowedly calling for his defeat. Murkowski's probably going to win in Alaska, despite all. So I think that hopefully people can see the emperor doesn't really see. I think, as you said, McCarthy's got to worry about his own votes in his own conference. But look, if this guy goes out there and he loses some of the most high-profile races that he's trying to engage on, you'd hope that there would be a sense. Well, maybe we can stand against this guy, and we won't kill our political futures. Well,
it's possible, and I think there are Republicans in some states who are thinking about how they can defeat the Trump candidates in new ways. They make them as independents or whatever. There's some talk about that.
And then you have a state like Ohio where the entire field for the Senate Republican nomination, it's like,
except for one. There's one there, Dolan. He's pretty independent. He has enough money to be independent, but they have a long way to go. I mean, that party is still very, very Trumpy. And how many times have we heard now, John, from the pundit class that Trump is waning in the Republican Party?
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear he doesn't have the support he once did. And there's a poll here that says only half the Republicans want him to be the nominee again. Well, half
is pretty damn good. That's enough to win.
Exactly. So I'm a little bit suspicious of all of this, but I hope that happens. We'll have to see. Well, John, we're gonna wrap it up now, and I want to ask you one final question, which is, as we move toward the 2022 election, which at least right now does not appear to be a very good one for Democrats. Republicans have an excellent chance to take over the House, and probably a good chance to take over the Senate too. How does this position Biden for 2024? It's easy to say, well, he's in trouble, or he's too old, or they'll try to get somebody else. It isn't obvious who they'd replace him with. Could it also be that if 2022 is a disaster, it turns out to be like 1994 was for Bill Clinton? Clinton probably wouldn't have won re-election had he not suffered a terrible defeat in 1994, or maybe Obama with 2010's midterm.
2010, yeah.
What do you think?
I think that, first of all, there's a lot of people are looking ahead to the idea of a Biden-Trump rematch. I actually think that it's more likely that neither one of them runs.
Either one. Yes.
Yeah. And then that's a whole separate question for the Democrats, and actually a fascinating one politically is, there's very little appetite to kind of just turn it over to Kamala Harris. And she'll have to fight for it, and fight mightily for it. And it may be a rather ugly Democratic primary, but
most of them are.
Yes, most of them are. This one could be particularly ugly. I mean, it really could be. And what does Biden do? Does he support the woman he chose as vice president? I mean, a lot of people, as you know, a lot of people around Biden,
Yes.
you ask them what happened to everyone. Yeah, they're not there. I would expect, you're the guy with the crystal ball. If I could borrow the crystal ball for a second, I would expect that Republicans win the House and win it maybe even pretty decisively. And then, it's overreach. It's exactly what you saw when Newt Gingrich won in 94, with the, Tea Party win in 2010. Overreach. They'll set it up nicely for the pendulum to swing wildly back the other way, and for the Democrats to be in a good position for 2024 if they don't entirely screw it up in the process of picking a nominee.
Yes, that's a good calculation in politics, to assume that chaos will prevail. John, I just want to thank you very, very much. As always, you've been great to the UVA Center for Politics. Of course, I did teach your daughter.
Yes.
And
Karl, I think, was the best student that ever ran through the place, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'll tell you whatever you want to hear. No problem.
Yeah.
But seriously, as you said, this is almost as important as your wife and daughters. Not quite.
Yes. Yeah. Notice I said professional. Yeah.
Professionally. You were careful about that in case they're listening.
And by the way, sorry, this was a family project. Both of my daughters, Emily and Anna, and my wife Maria, read every page of that book, and particularly front row of especially front row of the Trump show, and gave me edits and helped make it what it is, and supported me and argued with me along the way on stuff, and we had a lot of lively discussions around the household. So they were a big part of that book, and I'm a huge fan of the Center for Politics and of the University of Virginia. And I just hope you invite me down in person sometime. I mean, all this Zoom stuff. I mean, can we get
ready?
No,
we want you down. Well, I've seen you here in person, but we want you down in person for sure. You will be one of the first, maybe right after we enjoy Trevor Noah.
Right.
White House Correspondents Association. But seriously, all you've done is interrupt the promo for your book, and it's okay with me.
I know, it's outrageous. Now we're out of time.
No. We're going to put this up again, and Jason, please show the book next to Jonathan. This really, honest to God, and we do a lot of books, but this one you have to get. You have to read. You have to think about, and it's going to be valuable to you for the coming years, because whatever this says in the subtitle, the final act of the Trump show, with Trump, the final act is stretched out. So
it's still going on.
It's still going on. You'll need this as your guide to the show. Jonathan, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the great job you do every day in reporting the news to us. Keep the focus on the January 6th committee and everything surrounding it, because it happens to be critical for the future of the Republic. I really believe that, and I think you do too.
Absolutely.
Thanks a million, John.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care. Say hi to the family.
You got it. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.